Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members from the developer borrowers. A few notes to start off with. We are being live streamed, so this is going right out. Anybody who wants to see it throughout the area on the internet can do so. The first thing to do is a few matters. The fire exits are out to the rear, those two doors there, out through the main entrance and out to the back of the car park. The toilets are on your left out of that door, and there is water to the right, but I see there are no beakers or anything there for you to put the water in, so don't be afraid to swipe one of the coffee cups on the coffee tray if you really want some water. This meeting is due to close by 1700. We hope we can do it by then. I would think if it goes well, we should be able to do that. The format today is as follows: a brief contact by the officers, which I'll introduce you to. In fact, I think we'll do that next. The officers who are up front with me would introduce themselves. Gina?
Good afternoon, I'm Gina Small. I manage the Urban Fringe delivery team.
Hello, I'm Ian Lloyd. I'm a planning officer in the Urban Fringe delivery team. I've been dealing with the planning pre-application.
Ian, your mic is not on because Gina's is on. Right, try again.
Shall I say that again?
Yes, please, because anything that wants to be said or anybody wants to ask a question, unless they use the microphone, will not be recorded.
Hello, my name is Ian Lloyd. I'm a planning officer in the Urban Fringe delivery team. I've been dealing with the planning pre-application.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. I am Vice Chairman I'm Richard Foss, Vice Chairman of the D&M Committee, and chairing this meeting this afternoon.
Dominic Scott from Barton Woolwell, working for Barwood Land. And Neil Thorne, Director of Transport at Peterborough Associates, with the Transport and Engineering Consultants advising Barwood on this site.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we have several other officers who are in the room. Right, I don't think we need to introduce them at the moment. Right. A brief context of how this will go. We'll get the officers present how the programme is going to go. Then the ward member for Woolwell, Councillor Hotwood, will speak. Members of the audience are asked to make notes of any questions, but please leave them to the end, and I will take questions from anybody who puts their hand up. But remember, you will have to go to a microphone so that it can be heard. Okay? Questions and responses are limited to 5 minutes per individual. I shall use some discretion on that matter. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Gina now for her to explain the actual process we're going to go through.
Thank you, Chair. The pre-application process has been managed by my team. The Council's Local Planning Authority entered into a planning performance agreement with developers Barwood in February 2018. This was to provide pre-application advice on the allocated site in the joint local plan known as Land at Woolwell. At that time, policy PLY 44 was a draft policy, but the expectation was that the policy would be adopted, which it since has with the adoption of the joint local plan. The Plymouth and South West Devon Joint Local Plan sets a requirement for the delivery of 26,700 new homes to be delivered over the plan period 2014 to 2034, of which 19,000 are within the Plymouth policy area that Land at Woolwell is situated. Future development, therefore, must be consistent with the aims of the policy PLY 44, which envisages a comprehensive residential-led mixed-use sustainable urban extension, as well as the wider policies of the joint local plan. Ian Lloyd will now describe the pre-application process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just say a few short words, first of all, the purpose of the pre-application process. So the aims and benefits of pre-application discussions include identifying the need for specialist advice and input early in the process, for raising the quality of development, understanding and addressing community concerns, and gaining community acceptance through engagement and consultation, and also identifying sufficient information to support a final planning application. In terms of the process, the process has been long and detailed, as might be expected with a development of this scale. There was agreement for engagement with external bodies and neighbouring authorities have been involved, notably Joint Local Plan and Dartmoor National Park authorities, as well as Devon County Council as Highway Authority, together with other stakeholders. As for drawing the pre-application matters to a conclusion, a written pre-application response has recently been issued and in conjunction with this developer forum process will enable the developers to understand the Council's position and any concerns and any areas of required focus. In turn, the Developers Forum is an opportunity for Barwood to present their scheme to members and the community so that everyone is better informed when an application eventually comes in. Until such time as an application is submitted, the door remains open for discussions, and the expectation is that any future application will address concerns identified, including areas requiring more work, in order to properly inform any future planning application. I'll hand you back to Gina to introduce the Barwood team.
So that concludes the brief introduction. It's time to hand over to the Barwood team for their presentation. Dominic Scott is the lead master planner, and he will introduce the proposals and will be supported by transport specialist Neil Thorne. The work has been focused on the development of a site-wide master plan, but the challenge for any application will be to provide supporting information to demonstrate that the master plan is the optimum solution and how this application will achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Just before you go ahead on it, there is a list going around that you can sign for attendance. If you do that, you will then get the notes of this meeting. If you don't sign it, you won't get it. Okay? Thank you.
I hope you can all hear me properly. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. It's quite a long slide presentation, deliberately so because we want to do the work that Gina and Ian have described. We want to do it justice, but I will try and not procrastinate too long in places. So our first slide really looks at where we are in the process. Gina's already described that. There's a timeline on here, starts in 2016, goes through 17, 18 and 19. There are two colours of boxes on here. The orange, which is the stakeholder engagement, and that means talking to yourselves, South Hams, to Plymouth, to all the bodies who have a stake in this development. The blue boxes described as community engagement, and that's where we, in 2018, put some fairly serious effort into engaging with residents, with the community. Now, of course, these two things aren't mutually exclusive. They are intrinsically linked together. But the reason we put this slide up at the beginning is to, I suppose, be clear that we first started our work back in the end of 2015, and that's, my maths is correct, nearly 4 years ago. And during that time, we have built a relationship with your officers, with Gina and Ian and others who are here in the room, and also with members. I think it's true to say, others may disagree with me, that that's been they've asked some pretty tough questions. They've put us on the rack a few times. Yes, there are people in the audience today who've asked me some pretty searching and pretty hard questions, and that's right and proper. That is what this process is all about. That's what this slide is all about. I think the box which says JLP adopted and PLY 44 land at Woolwell allocation confirmed in March, that was a critical moment in this timeline. That enables all that work that we've done to date to really start to find itself formed up and ready for this outline planning application. But of course, we didn't just meet with officers and members here in the public. There have been meetings with parish councils, there have been meetings with MPs, there is the relationship to the Bickley Neighbourhood Plan Group, which is critically important in the work that you see on this slide, and 42 Commando RM. We know how important they are to the history of this part of the world. They live here, they work here, they're part of the community. So we've tried very hard to cover it off, and when I say that, I do think I need to give some thanks to the officers and the members who've worked with us to do that. It's been much appreciated. So the public consultation, as I mentioned, was very much focused in the mid part of 2018. We got to know a lot of, I suspect some of you were there at the exhibitions and talked to us at the time. As you would expect with such an important proposal locally, we had a lot of interest, a good number of visitors, certainly a good number of feedback forms. Often you see quite a large number of visitors, but not necessarily that many feedback forms and that much return information. People come to talk, but they don't necessarily perhaps record their opinions. I think that's been helped by the fact that we've had the project website, that we have been using technology, we have been able to have a dedicated email address. I think that's been very important. But actually, meetings where we sat with a group of 11 residents, again facilitated by Councillor Hotwood, and could actually get down to some serious business of how do I get to my house, what's going to happen to my back garden fence. These are very small scale details in the big scheme of things, talking about what do 2,000 houses look like. But they are critically important, not just for those individuals, but for us to understand and respond very clearly when we put this application in. So all of that, I think, is, you can always do better with these things, I accept that, but it's been a good process, yeah, I think it's going to pay dividends, hopefully, for the quality of the scheme when it does arrive on site. The blue box on this slide really is saying that now that we're in, and Ian alluded to this, I think, we are getting close to the point where applications can be submitted, must be in accordance with the policy, PLY 44, and will need to demonstrate that technically it's robust, that it's viable, and dare I say that we have listened and responded to all the consultation that's taken place. It's pointless otherwise if we don't. This is a tough one, tough in the sense of, if I was asked the question, how would you summarise those key issues that have come out of the engagement? I think there's a list here. I try not to read down slides when I'm doing these presentations, but in this case I'm going to do it. A single comprehensive master plan. It is a single policy area. There are multiple land interests in there, and the plan needs to cover all of the ground, and that's how we've approached it. So when we do our community consultation, we've been very clear that it's a plan for the whole allocation. The second point, community cohesion, them and us. This is a little bit more difficult to put your finger on, but I've come across this on a number of projects over the last 5 to 10 years. If you create an urban extension or a new housing scheme, it's great for those people that move in. And there will be people who are affected who currently live locally. The worst thing that can happen is that you get this, and it's not a technical term, I apologise for this them and us scenario whereby you have a kind of part of a community in the new piece and part of a community. We must do everything we can to avoid that scenario. And that message was given to us by councillors, by members of the public, but I think we knew that anyway, just intuitively, just having visited the site. Our first site visit back in 2015, we all met at the Woolwell Centre, who have always been very courteous and very helpful to us, I have to say. That's a slight digression. And as soon as we walked out onto the site, we could see the relationship between the primary school, the community centre, the shops. We could see how Tesco relates to the community. And we were able to very quickly pick up on some of those key issues, which have been reinforced again and again to us. But at the end of the day, when the OS plan is printed in 2050, I think it would be a real shame if there was this kind of them and us. Oh, you live in the new bit of Woolwell, don't you? Or that is not success. That is not success. One of the big issues, which I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about today, it's been there from day one. It will continue to be discussed and will continue to evolve, I'm sure. But improvements to transport infrastructure. Absolutely bottom line for all of us, I think. The fourth point, health and well-being, designing it into the proposal. Again, a little bit more, perhaps not quite so direct to understand, but what I mean by that is existing residents, new residents. Let's make sure that this scheme delivers the kind of facilities, and I'm talking about a loop to walk your dog, somewhere for the kids to play, somewhere to do some exercise, extendable runs of loops. Let's make maximum use of the site, and I don't mean in terms of covering in hard material, I mean in terms of green infrastructure, in terms of leisure use, in terms of education. There's a new primary school, that's all part of that equation. Teaching our next generations to look after themselves, and can the site help do that? It's an increasingly important subject in the planning world, and I think we can, if we do well, we can take a march on many other sites on that one. I don't need to tell you this, but it was obvious to us from our very first site visit, dealing positively with topography and the visual sensitivity. We can see from the site, you can see the Dartmoor National Park, therefore they can see you. That's not rocket science, that's just very clear. There are ways that you can deal with topography positively, and I think that what we've done, or what the team has done, and when I say team, I do mean with the officers, is look at examples that have worked well, and look at examples, importantly, that don't work well, and make sure that in any applications that come forward, we're very clear and explicit about what you should and shouldn't do in relation to designing with levels and topography. It's all in the detail, I get it, but it is really important, that one. When it goes wrong, it can be it can create divisions across sites. It doesn't join things together. Controlling design quality, that is a question that is, again, ongoing. Whatever images we show to you in exhibitions, whatever we put on the screens today, how can going forward over the next 10, 15 years, can you, as the authority, as members and officers, guarantee that level of design quality which is promised at this stage? The answer is in design codes, is in the structure of the applications. I know as an authority that you've had lots of recent experience on other sites. I think that holds you in very good stead. The officers are certainly well versed on that, as our members. And finally, and I perhaps should have put this one together with improvements to transport infrastructure, construction, traffic and phasing. That's certainly critical for local residents, and often the classic answer is there will be a construction management plan. Well, I think we need to be seeing that now so that everyone can be reassured that that is in hand. So, slight change in direction on the presentation. What is it? What are the key aspects of the proposal? What is it that is going to be delivered? There are 6 items on here. Sorry, they're slightly up and down, but they do fit in the box. First of all, top left, up to 2,000 new homes. I think the important point I'd add to that is that there will be a complete mix and tenure type range. So they will range from 1-bedroom apartments right the way through to 5-bedroom family houses. So a complete mix. I think there are room for bungalows, there are room for self-build and custom build within this project. I'm sure we'll get some questions on that later on. But we've had those questions through the public consultation, and we've put some thought into how we might do that in the future. Moving along the screen to the right, it is definitive that we will need a new primary school, and there will be improved community facilities. I think there are still questions about, do we improve the existing facilities at the Woolwell Centre? Is it a combination thereof? Certainly externally, new pitches, play areas. I talked about well-being earlier on. There is a great opportunity with a scheme of this size to deliver that kind of infrastructure and deliver it well. Often it becomes a bit of an afterthought, it's forced through. No, that needs to be an integral part of the offer. Top right, well-connected development. Perhaps stating the obvious, and not just about cars, of course. It's about foot, it's about cycleways, it's about connections to the strategic cycleways like the Plym Valley. It's about making sure that all options are available. And that includes things like DDA compliance and making sure that all parts of the site are accessible. I shouldn't be able to do this. Bottom left. Yes, okay, maybe a lot of the employment possibilities are related to the construction phases of the project. But even outside of that, there will be jobs within community, within retail offer, within the school, and within the management of the project in the future. And here's the critical part that comes out of policy POY 44. There will be a new community park. I will go on to explain where it is in the scheme and what the nature of that park will be. It is, and I'll be clear at this stage, it is over and above the policy requirement for public open space. That's not us trying to score points at this stage, that's simply making a statement of fact that it is a requirement of the policy. We're very comfortable with that delivery, and we think it can be a major part of the scheme. Then finally, bottom right, clearly there needs to be some significant infrastructure improvements, and I'm not just talking about the site and how we access it, I'm talking about off-site highways improvements, which I know Neil will come on to later on in the presentation. Again, from day one, conscious of the proposals for Woolwell to the George and how all of this needs to tie together and work, all the pieces need to work to their maximum capability. So that's our introduction, sorry, quite long. Preparation. This is really going back to 2015-16 and trying to let you know how we've approached the design of this project in the context of collaborative working with the authority. Drawing, actually it's better on the screen than on this one here. You can see the green, it's just slightly grey to me, but this is the PLY 44 area. So on the orientating ourselves on this plan, on the left-hand side you have the Tavistock Road. You can see Tesco, actually I can do it with the mouse, can't I? So there's Tesco's. The existing Woolwell Centre just there, primary school. So that's Woolwell Road. We then got to the roundabout at the bottom and up to Pickpie Drive, that's Pickpie Plantation. You'll notice the tramway going all the way up through the site. It's quite a sensitive mouse, so bear with me. That's New Road there, and we've got Bickley on this side of the map. So you can see that effectively all along this edge, the proposals bolt, if that's not a technical term, bolt into the existing urban fabric of Woolwell. Around the southern and eastern edges, you've got existing woodland in the Plym Valley. And as you move further north, and you almost get, I suppose, parallel with Bickley itself, suddenly the landscape opens up, there's less tree coverage, the valley is getting less steep at that point as you head up towards New Road. And this top section of the site is more exposed. Yes, there's less vegetation there, and therefore visual lines are greater. And perhaps the one strangeness, if I can call it that, of the site boundary is this straight line here, which some of you may be thinking, what on earth is that? Well, that is the limit of the PLY 44 allocation, and it's actually defined by an overhead power line on site. So physically, it's not a hedgerow. It is a physical element, but it's up in the air, and that is the northern extent of the policy area. Okay. This is the same coverage, the same plan, if that's right, the same policy area, but just superimposed onto the aerial photograph. And again, it's the Tavistock Road, the Woolwell Centre in the centre, Pickpie Drive, Pickpie Plantation, the existing woodland in the Plym Valley, there's Bickley and the Barracks Church in the centre there, and then New Road is coming across the top here. And again, sorry, the tramway passing through the middle of the site. So our starting point was always, although it was a draft at the time, was policy PLY 44. You'll be glad, I'm not going to try and read down this because that would be foolish. What we've done is just tried to summarise the key issues that come out of that, and that's not to underestimate it in any way, shape or form. And some of those things are repetition, or not repetition, no, are match the items that we had on the public consultation, so things like addressing challenging topography, ensuring connecting neighbourhoods. Consider landscape character and historic assets. Well, that's virtually the starting point of our design process, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. Positive relationship to street green valleys, yes, again, understanding the landscape. Actually, in fact, a lot of these issues are very directly landscape focused, and rightly so, because of the location. And here's an interesting one, ensure a clearly defined edge to the city. Yet we're very conscious of, Woolwell is a community, a set of neighbourhoods, but it is also part of something much larger, and we need to understand that, some of the strategic linkages, whether it's roads or cycleways, footpaths, etc. And interestingly, very early, I remember somebody from the Dartmoor National Park team, if they're here today, hello again, but they said, we need to consider not just the approach from the park into the development, how do you first arrive at Plymouth and Woolwell, but we want to do the reverse. How, moving northwards, do you present the park? So anything that happens in that top part of the site there, adjacent to the Tavistock Road, really needs to think about creating a positive message, a positive gateway, both to the city, to Woolwell, but also to the park to the north. And again, goes without saying, identifies the importance of the Woolwell to the George scheme and how that will effectively be able to make this thing happen and function. So back in 2015-16, normally on a master planning project of this scale, I'd be very keen to get my pens out and start sketching ideas and thoughts. And that's what normally happens. And then all the other consultants join me around the table and we work through these things and we try and make sure that all components, whether it's ecology, archaeology, transport, drainage, landscape, all these things are balanced in the way we start to think about the site. This was different. This was very different. What happened here was that our landscape architect consultant, Ben Rosedale from EDP, did a block of work which was really getting to know the landscape character, the topography, everything about the site. And he presented that to us in quite a formal way. In fact, he presented it, I think, to some members and to some officers back in late 2015 as our first understanding, really to try and make sure we got it right. And what he did at that point, which then formed the basis of our first work, was to look at the existing landscape character studies, the existing sensitivity studies, and really make sure we understood the lie of the land. And again, what I've done here is rather than, I think he's got a presentation that some of you in this room will have seen, which is about 100 slides. Now, you'll be glad to know I haven't done that. I've tried to summarize it. But effectively, the challenge, the objectives are in the green box there, the summary points. Respond to, and the open views to and from Dartmoor, the requirement for woodland structure planting. So I don't think it's a case, we don't think it's a case of just designing new enormous woodland buffers to try and hide everything. I think we need to be a bit smarter than that, and we need to be a bit more intellectual than that. It goes without saying almost, but I will say that one of the things we want to do is preserve as much of the existing vegetation, trees, hedgerows, woodland blocks on site as we physically can, and I think we can achieve that. So an enhancement of the existing. Respect the physical constraints of steep-sided valleys, and that is partly to do with movement and accessibility, admittedly. And understand that bigger picture about what we see from the church of Bickley, the barracks, how lighting in the barracks might affect the site, how any new proposals we might put on the site might affect those long views from places like Shaw Prior, etc. And then importantly at the end, the tramway. I think it was always discussed that the tramway, particularly in this north-eastern section of the site where the views are most visible, most open from the national park, the tramway provides us an existing physical barrier to work to. At the moment, you can walk along all of this section quite comfortably. There. This section you struggle to find it. It is there. It's buried in bits of hedgerow and becomes single-sided. But this section, you can still see the Devonshire banks. You can still see the vegetation on either side. And it's a major asset for the project. So as you'll see, we're treating that as one of our main foot pedestrian cycle routes, finds through the department. But this is really essentially the summary of our objectives. Of course, we carried out some detailed analysis, which includes agricultural land quality. It includes understanding how the drainage works, the brooks, the stream courses, which parts of the sites are damp, etc. But it really did focus on topography and vegetation. Now, apologies for the lurid colour of this, but this is effectively a heat diagram, which the purple are the low areas and the white are the high areas. You'll see a finished version of this later on, which is actually a bit easier to understand, I do admit. But the reason I'm showing you this now is that understanding that the highest parts of the site are effectively around the existing sports pitches to the sort of south of Bickley Down Road and Blackhaven Hill. There is then a sort of apron which goes around the site to Pickpie Plantation. And although the top section of the site around New Road is, and I'll use my words carefully, relatively flat, sections around the central sections of the tramway and down into the bottom southernmost sections of the site, you really do suddenly find the steepness of those slopes. But even in the southern part of the site, southern part of the policy area, there are some relatively large, and they're not flat, they're not all white as this one is. They have slope on them,
but they are not as steep as some of the main river valleys. And part of that landscape character work was, sorry, I ought to orientate this again. So, Tavistock Road, I think we've just got the A38 on the very bottom left-hand corner of the slide there. The red is the policy area, so you can see it's at a different scale. Apologies for jumping up and down the scales. And these are viewpoints that were taken. They're one of many. I just happened to have selected this grouping out of this very long presentation. But you're into the Dartmoor National Park, and the next two slides will show you the view from slides 8 and 9. And we wanted to really understand from these long views, Hawks Tor, and I think the next one is the Jewestone, if I'm correct, what we were actually looking at across the landscape. You can see the barrack site, you can see Woolwell in the distance, you can see some of the, again, sorry about the terminology, the big sheds, and they're all sitting up on the high ground. That is the nature of development in this part of the world. Effectively, it's sitting on the higher ground. And interestingly, you can see the tramway coming right the way across that photograph. So the reason I put these in is to different view, but actually you can see the barracks better on that shot there. The reason I put them in is to make the point that there was a lot of preparation work in terms of landscape quality, landscape character, and the landscape visuals before we even started thinking about the proposals. And we asked the landscape architects to come up with a strategy that they felt was suitable, was born out of this context, was born out of this relationship with the national park. And I'm going to try and guide you in. This is the tramway coming around the site, as we've seen. We're back to the previous scale here. If you look at these, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 diamond graphics that are shown on this drawing. And from the national park, from beyond Bickley, as it were, this is the most sensitive part of the site, and this is where we need to reinforce the existing hedgerow structure. As I said before, it's not about creating a giant new woodland that hides everything. That's not how development in this part of the world works. But what we don't want is, when you look across these long views, is to have a totally solid, if that's the right word, continuous is the right word, a continuous roofscape. It needs trees, vegetation, a glimpse of some roofscape, trees, vegetation. And some of that's existing, some of it needs to be proposed. And this was the first time that this concept of, let's call it the woodland fins, I know it's, again, sorry, not a technical term, but the idea of the woodland fins, the reinforcement, the very carefully placed additional landscape came forward. And already, even at this early stage, the piece of the site, the policy area that, because of its steepness, because of its sensitivity, wouldn't be used for development, almost started to become by default the community park. And very early on, officers from the national park were saying, if you do that, please don't turn it into a very formal park. It needs to be naturalistic. It needs to be almost agricultural in its quality. Maybe even animals are used as part of the maintenance and management regime of that park in the future. Interesting concept, but I could see the logic straight away. This really is just the next sequence in the diagrams, where these pieces of woodland and new structure are starting to be positioned, linking together with pickpie plantation, forming screens in some places, forming little viewpoints in others, but it's all based around the tramway. Now, woodland planting in 3 forms is in the green box on the bottom right-hand side. I better explain myself. Some of those blocks of woodlands will be solid. Some of them buffer, that is, number 1. Number 2, filter, strategic groupings or blocks. An accent, maybe individual trees, very carefully positioned. So, yes, we are playing nature. Yes, the landscape architects are going to have a very interesting job to do here. But there is a way that any development that takes place in this part of the site can be assimilated, mitigated to some extent, through the skill of the landscape architects on this project. Tramway as a strategic foot cycleway link, that's a no-brainer from the beginning. And then importantly, all of this site needs to be drained, and the water needs to be held on site before released to the wider picture. And very simply, and I perhaps apologise to anybody who is a drainage engineer in the room at this point, the northern extents of the site will drain to attenuation basins situated and constructed adjacent to New Road. They will then feed into the watercourse and effectively work their way down the river valley into the system. The southern extremities of the site do a similar thing, but they drain southwards to the point here, are held before they too go into the bigger system. So the green infrastructure, the landscape proposition, the blue infrastructure, the drainage strategy, those two things need to work hand in hand. And on this scheme, it could work really well. Site constraints. I've talked a lot about landscape. I've talked a bit about some of the other items, but this drawing captures all of the things that need to be taken into account when looking at the site. So we've got the contours on, so we can see the way the levels and falls work. We've got public rights of way. We've got our strategic requirements. So the offset, this purple line here that I'm just tracing with the mouse, this offset 40 metres to the existing woodland, that becomes a constraint to us. One apology perhaps to you that the hedgerows, a lot of them are shown in blue. That's simply because they're categorised A, B, C, D, with A being the highest quality, D being the lowest. And our constraints plan tells us that information. So if we do have to put a break in a hedgerow, we know where to go to try and put that break in, the lowest quality. And finally, just on here, without trying to explain the whole diagram, there are historic buildings, listed buildings. The church in Bickley is the obvious one. But in the northern part of the site, we've got some quite considerable utilities constraints, so gas mains, water pipelines, and I mentioned the overhead. And they have their own requirements, their own standoff requirements. So, first part of our process, knowing the site, getting our landscape strategy together, and really understanding the site, including the stuff that's below ground, including archaeological work. Again, different scale of plan. Here, we're almost back to the previous plan, where this is the policy area. Here's Woolwell, and then we've got the Tavistock Road coming right the way down through the slide. What this scheme is showing us is where the community assets are. So where retail is, where education is, where healthcare is, where employment is, the blue parts. And whilst we won't be influencing any of that, understanding all of this is very important, because this is a mixed-use scheme. What I don't want to be doing, or what the team doesn't want to be doing, which I don't think you would want us to do, is to put something very new and shiny within the scheme, which is at the detriment of existing facilities. And we need to be very careful about how we handle that. It'll, of course, come out in the Section 106 negotiations, I understand that. But even at the early stages, we can do our best to understand how all this fits together. Slight change in tack here. One of the things we also have to do in preparation terms is understand the local built character. And this really is slang again, a game of two halves, really. You have the existing Woolwell, South Way. You have other pieces, which I won't try and define, but you have the housing that was built between the wars to the present day. But in Rowborough, the historic core of Rowborough, in Bickley, in Shaw Prior, you have much older, much more historic pieces of settlement, buildings. And for us, it's understanding what we're connecting to, and really understanding that well. But it's also understanding about what the original DNA of the place is about, and without boring you to death. Analysis of the layouts, analysis of the building forms, story heights, roof pitches. Do they have chimneys? Don't they? Are gables, dormer windows used? What do they do on the gable ends? All of that's really important to understand, so that when we create new instructions, and this comes to the point I mentioned earlier on about how do you control design quality, is what is that basic DNA? What is the starting point for us? Once you move to the bottom right hand of this drawing, then things change slightly. Okay, I know we've got a slide of the eco-village, and there's very mixed reactions about the quality, whether people like that, contemporary, traditional. But it is now part of the place, and therefore needs to be thought about and recognised. But once you move to the more historic buildings and the original DNA of this part of the world, you start to understand how stone is used. You start to understand that just seeing a white building, it might be white painted stone, it might be white painted brick, it might be in a more traditional way, a more contemporary way, render. And understanding proportions, understanding the characteristics of this is really, really important. And we would need to present this in the outline application. We've obviously shared it with officers and members. But we need to explain how any new proposal relates to this original DNA. And that's part of the challenge that we've given ourselves. Flick through there. So that's all about preparation. That's all about getting ourselves in the right place to actually start thinking about, well, how do you deliver What is the plan? I'm going to run through a series of 6, in some ways very simple diagrams, but in some ways they really do tell the complete story. It has to start with an understanding of the site on the left-hand side, number 1, the site. You have to understand the topography, you have to understand the views, and you have to understand what the tramway can do for us in terms of future plan. If I move to the drawing on the right-hand side, one thing which is, I think, crucial to success is the relationship between the existing Woolwell Centre, school, community, and whatever we produce within this new plan, this new layout. We spent some time initially thinking about where do you put that central piece of a primary school, community facilities, sports facilities, maybe some small-scale retail, local shops, I'm not talking about big supermarket type arrangements. Where do you put that? Do you put that at one end where the biggest of the roads goes past? Do you put it at the southern end to draw people into the site? We talked with officers about this, we've discussed it at length, we talked about it in the design review panel, which I will come on to, which was held earlier this year. And effectively, and it's not, again, it may seem obvious in some ways, but you put it in the middle of the scheme. You put it in the middle of the scheme so that people living here have got the shortest distance to walk to it, as have people at the far end of here. But importantly, and the real rationale for doing it, is that it can get us the closest links to the existing Woolwell Centre and the Woolwell community. And I think that's a good reason to do it. We've talked a little bit about the landscape edge and the community park, and that will form a fundamental piece of definition for this scheme. Once it's defined, you don't step over it. That is the edge of the city. Remember, it was one of the objectives in the policy requirements. If you then start applying to that diagram on the left-hand side the strategy I talked about with the woodland fins, working the tramway, and actually then picking up pick by plantation and reinforcing the existing sports pitches which occupy the space just here, adjacent to the, or just next to the, or across from the Woolwell Centre. Then you start to sort of see the green strategy, drainage at the lowest parts of the site. This then starts to become our landscape structure. You've probably been waiting a long time for me to say something about movement and vehicular movement. A scheme of this scale and order needs some kind of definition. It needs some kind of structure. It needs a street, I hesitate, I don't use the word road, I use the word street, to make sure that everyone can orientate themselves. A lot of schemes recently, and I'm talking about the last 15, 20 years, have been based around the principles of very intricate layouts, lots of turns, corners and twists. You know, you get lost in those places because there isn't a hierarchy of streets and blocks and buildings. And what we're proposing here is effectively a new access position on the Tavistock Road, at the north, as you'd perhaps expect. And there's a spine road, a spine route that goes through the site, services the site, and joins up with Pickpye Drive in the south. Now, Neil's going to give you some more information later about Bickley Down Road and the fact that we'd originally shown it as connected through to the scheme, but through consultation and some fairly hard discussions, I have to say, but very genuine discussions, we're not proposing that now. We're not proposing to have a vehicular connection to Bickley Down Road, or at least the western end of it. Towerfield Drive, on the other hand, is a second level, second tier access position for us. We'll give you some more information on this as we go through and Neil speaks and you get a rest from my voice. But the existing tramway is still an important part of our structure. So you bring all that together on the final diagram there, and you start to think about the darker grey colour, what we've called the central core, which is probably where the density is at its greatest. The edges, park frontage, and then once you're, if you like, contained by the woodland to the south, woodland development, they can have a slightly different character, a different set of instructions. And again, I will come back to this as we go on. So you bring that all together, and this is the concept master plan. You can see the tramway is the big green line. Here's the spine that I've just talked about. The limitations of development, the community park, I'm running out of desk, the community park sitting here. And then this important link between the existing local centre and how we actually make this sort of tie together, and how any new facilities here are easily accessible for the existing community. This stuff here is not just about the buff colour, the beige colour on here, it's about all of this slide and beyond. I'm sorry, I will go back there because I didn't say this, but we need to, and this was something that came out of our discussions, particularly with Bickley Parish, was making sure that people who live beyond the scheme aren't inconvenienced, still have the correct routings. So joining onto New Road and making connections work here is also an important part of the proposition. Now, you might think they look a bit scribbly, a bit childlike, but these are some of the early sketches where we really started to put some block formation and some landscape structure into all that work that we'd done previously. And of course we were able to share this with the planning and urban design officers within the council. And where did we get to? This is the illustrative master plan, which we used in the public consultation events in 2018. When the outline application is submitted, there will be a set of plans which define the big principles. What's green, what's built, where's the school, where's the centre, what are the densities, what are the building heights, the maximums, what are the access positions. This drawing will be included within that submission, but it has no status. It is illustrative. It shows that if you follow all of those rules and instructions that the parameter plans define, you could get something like this. And as we go through, you'll see that a lot of the work that's been done since then is about testing this. It's about making sure that densities and building heights and access positions for people can be accommodated. But this is the current illustrative master plan, with the school positioned here overlooking the community park. Again, we had a lot of debate about where to put the primary school. Should it be further in to the sort of core of the scheme, closer to the existing school? One of the reasons that eventually we selected this position here was because of the long distance views across the valley. And do you remember I talked about these green fins being able to break up the development edge, so you saw roof green, roof green. This bite out of the development area is now principally green. And a bit later on I'm going to show you a cross section across the school, across the slope and into the sports pavilion. So just hold this image in your mind when that section comes up. I'll refer back to it. We have a land budget drawing. It's not something that I'd expect you necessarily to be able to kind of review in detail here, but what it does, it allows us to prove to the authority that the development areas are correct, that we have the right amount of public open space, that the community park is the size that we say it is, that the school site is fit for purpose and can be dealt with in, even though it's sloping, the flat areas for pitches can be accommodated. And importantly, it shows drainage attenuation. It commits to things like play areas and allotments and the buffering that we've talked about. And now, you're probably sick of my voice by now, so I'm going to hand over to Neil, who's going to talk specifically about transport issues.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dominic. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as Dominic said, really, I'll start off with my first slide. I've called this access improvements, but I think Dominic made a really good point earlier. And while the master plan is inherently landscape-led, I think connectivity, access, community cohesion are all very fundamental elements that underpin the master plan and were early considerations in sketching up some of the options that you saw in Dominic's part of the presentation. I've got an image on the slide to relate the site to sort of the wider context when it comes to transport. That's from the Joint Local Plan. It's the vision for the Northern Corridor, so you can see our usual hand trick, Dominic's worked quite well. So the Woolwell development is here, schematically, in the A3, A6 corridor coming through, connecting into, and this is the A38 Manadon junction here. And the vision for the corridor about improving vehicular capacity at specific pinch points. And I know there are concerns about the capacity of the corridor. There's been a huge amount of investment around Derriford area already in terms of improving not only the vehicular capacity of that corridor, but also the sustainable links, putting bus lanes in, getting bus priority, walking and cycling, trying to get people out of their cars, a huge amount of investment. The Woolwell to the George has been touched on, and I'll come back to that in a bit more detail later on. And of course the Manadon junction, as you head in towards Plymouth or further afield, are all really key important aspects that we spent the last 18-24 months trying really to understand through some detailed assessment work, and I'll touch on that briefly in a short while. But in terms of the strategy for the site, it's multifaceted, it's incredibly complicated, and it's taken quite a while to work through all the nuances of that in collaboration with Dominic and the rest of the team, balancing that with all the other considerations and opportunities and constraints you heard about earlier. But it essentially comes down to four key things. The much needed second way in and out of Woolwell, the secondary road up to the new northern roundabout north of Rober roundabout, to relieve the pressure that is currently felt in and around the Woolwell roundabout, and it's the second roundabout in with Towerfield Drive, relieving that pressure and getting new ways in and out. That's been critical to the master plan, ensuring that's legible, again, as Dominic was saying, so it's clear, it's not running off into cul-de-sacs, it's a legible and clear way in and out for people existing and new residents to use. There's a need, obviously, for fairly significant highway capacity improvements on the A36 corridor, and we're committed to making financial contributions towards those. The scheme at Wards the George is pretty well advanced, and again, I'll show you a bit more on that in a while. But also at Manadon, the A38 junction, Highways England and Plymouth City Council have got a joint study that they're working on there, looking at the solutions, building on the detail that they presented during the joint local plan examination for those of you who took part in that process. So we're obviously following those processes very carefully. Walking and cycling and public transport are obviously key. It's about ensuring that there are the options available for those that don't own a car or would prefer not to use the car, those that aren't able physically to use the car, ensuring that there is healthy and sustainable modes for people to use, but also to ensure that public transport is maintained, is accessible, is viable, and will continue, and to improve that where possible, which is what we've looked to do. Behind all of that is travel planning measures, so what you would normally expect in terms of incentives and information and infrastructure and service enhancements, encouragement and roles within both the public sector and the private sector as the development and the community is built out to try and encourage people to travel more sustainably and inform them of their opportunities. So all of that underpins those four main points. And then sort of a point I made at the bottom, really, that a transport assessment tends to be an evolving beast, especially on a development that is the scale of Woolwell that we're talking about here. There's a huge amount of very technical number crunching assessment work that needs to be done in parallel with some quite high level strategy work and viability work around ensuring simple things like bus services will end up making money so they don't stop when the developer walks away. And all of that is a very iterative process that takes a long time to do. We're nearly there. I think we've got a lot of the answers now, but we want to work through the details of some of those with Gina and Devon and the rest of yourselves as we work towards a planning decision. I tried to break this down into sort of on-site and off-site, and again, trying to keep things as simple as possible, really. But again, trying to let's try and get some legibility in here for you. So this is the Woolwell development here. I've got a red line around it to make it easier. This is the A386, and then this is the existing Woolwell Centre and Tesco's. To give you some context. This diagram is showing some pedestrian and cycle links, but essentially the point I'm trying to get across on this slide is that fundamentally we want to ensure the master plan is designed, is connected, and is planned in a way that makes it as easy as possible for people to be able to walk and cycle around, working with the contours to ensure that those are as flat as possible, but also providing more direct routes where we can along steeper ground that might not be accessible to all, but at least providing really direct connections for those that want to do that, but ensuring across the site that it is accessible and people are able to walk around between the house and the school and the shops and the bus services as easy as they can do, and even in between the existing and the new facilities as well, making sure those connections are in place. We're looking to improve the bus services, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, significantly increasing the frequencies through both the new and the existing areas of Woolwell. And to support that, looking to provide some high quality bus stops, real-time information, seating, cycle parking. And we've got a fairly comprehensive network of improvements just to ensure that the use of the bus is made as easy as possible for those who want to use it. New pedestrian cycle infrastructure, again, has been picked up in comments that we want people to be able to be healthy, to be active, to enjoy the community park, but also to get to school, to get to work, to get to the shops. So we've ensured that there's a really comprehensive network of pedestrian cycle routes. I couldn't begin to put all of them on this plan, you wouldn't see anything, but ensuring the master plan, looking back to Dominic's illustrative master plan through the fine details of the secondary streets and sort of around the edges, that is removing any cul-de-sacs for people walking around. Making sure that it's legible so people inherently know, or even with signage, that what is the way to the shops, etc. So using the tramway as a key function for that, the new primary street, I'm glad you used the word street, Dominic, thank you. Using the primary street as well in a really safe way, so that street to be designed in a way for everybody, so those who want to drive along it can drive along it, those who want to walk along it or cycle along it safely is designed in a way that allows them to do that. It's wide enough for buses to use, making sure that street it plays a really strong role in the master plan. Next one, again, so on site, so as well as the connections within the site, pedestrians and cyclists, it's about then connecting into Roeborough, connecting into Woolwell, making sure that is safe for everybody. The improvements of the bus services I talked about before, actually we've got a really positive location here for looking at how to improve bus services. I work on a huge amount of developments where actually the bus strategies are incredibly complicated or very difficult to make any serious improvements in a viable way, so they will continue beyond pump priming. Actually, what we've got here is a very good network already of services, the 42C, the one that runs up and down the A386, the park and ride not too far down the road. So actually we work through the business case for how many new buses, how many bums on seats will this development generate that we need to accommodate on buses. Actually, if we're successful in encouraging people, not only new residents, but existing residents, existing employees in Belvoir, for instance, and elsewhere, that they might want to use the bus, how much capacity do we need in that bus network to enable them to do so? All of that's been taken into account. And we've got a very flexible public transport strategy. There are options, actually, that we can respond to over time if the network changes. But essentially, there's options of either, I've listed it down here, but extending the park and ride up from the George. That's currently 4 buses an hour down into the city centre. Actually, we can increase the frequency of that to 5, and then extend that in and through Woolwell. I think it'll be a really, really attractive service for new residents and the existing community. We could divert one that currently runs up and down the A386. That can come through the site as well. That's 4 buses an hour. But we'd probably only want to do so in combination with, say, an extension of the park and ride that might therefore replace the service along Roeborough before it comes back through the site. Or indeed the third option, the 42C, that's at the moment 2 buses an hour, we could double the frequency of that bus service to 4 buses an hour, run that through the development, and sort of there's a mixture of the 2 or the 3 that I think will create a really good, attractive, sustainable community, sustainable options for people not to use their car, be able to leave those at home.
Sorry, while this slide is on the screen, I mentioned public consultation earlier. One of the subjects that came up, and then I think we had, I know Councillor Hotwood, we talked about this with her. On the bottom of this, sorry, can you use it? Yeah, the bottom of here on Woolwell Road, outside the current primary school, a lot of concerns were raised about safety for children and parents. And the question was put to us, is there anything that we can do as part of this scheme, these proposals, this project, that can improve the drop-off, the safety issues along there? Now, the classic response is, well, sorry, that's outside the red line area, that's nothing to do with us. That's not the response that we've given. We've said, no, I think there are probably possibilities that can be worked with the county highway engineers, with the community, with the members and officers, to look at that, because if that is something that can be a benefit to the wider community on the back of this project, then that's what we should look at that, and we should come up with a solution. Sorry,
yeah, great. Thank you, Dominic. The other thing in terms of the bus service as well, I know there's a fairly limited evening and weekend service, but also the added bums on seats, if you like, the added demand for use created by the new development means that actually through the service enhancement, that's also able to mean an increase in evening and weekend services, maybe a half-hourly service for evenings and weekends, which I think that should be a really good benefit for the local community. Touching briefly on off-site, the Woolwell to the George scheme, you obviously know a lot about that. You will know that Plymouth City Council went out to consultation on a variety of different options. Last year they came back to tell us that through all the modelling assessment work they've done, that their option B, the signalisation of what's currently the Woolwell roundabout, and the signalisation of the Woolwell Crescent junction onto the A386 is their preferred solution. They are currently working through the further detail of that and the design, and we've got more meetings planned to understand those in more detail. But there's strong commitment from Barwood that will contribute towards the delivery of that scheme. We know the importance of that to resolving not only the existing issues along the corridor, but also to accommodate some of the additional traffic that will be generated by the development. And similarly, the work we've done has identified the Manadon interchange, so the A386 junction with the A38, and again we've had conversations with Highways England and around their joint scheme that they're working on with Plymouth City Council, exploring in more detail, as I mentioned earlier, those initiatives that they had identified at the joint local plan making stage to improve Crown Hill and Manadon as one large junction, not only for vehicles but making it safer for people to cycle across the junction, and also to ensure that there's adequate bus priority through there, really emphasising the corridor, the really strong corridor actually, the A386, the Tavistock Road for buses. So those studies are ongoing, and again there's a recognition from Barwood that we will need to contribute towards that scheme as we move forward. We don't know any of the details yet, the study is ongoing, but we've got regular contact with Highways England to ensure that information, when it's ready, we will look at in great detail and agree with them and Southampton and Devon what that contribution would be. The other point, Dominic, having already jumped in once, usefully reminded me earlier, Bickley Down Road touched on that. I know it was a very sensitive subject at the public consultation we held previously. As Dominic has said, there's some fairly impassioned views actually on both sides of the camp, I have to say, about the role and function of Bickley Down Road as part of the access strategy for the Woolwell development. We were challenged to go away and look at that in a lot more detail and through evidence actually, rather than, I suppose, through emotive measures to understand the need or the purpose of an access along Bickley Down Road. My personal preference, I stated at the time, that I wanted to lead alone, its character alone, but I needed to ensure my sort of gut instincts as a transport planner has always has to be balanced through with evidence. And that evidence demonstrated that actually 3 points of connection that Dominic outlined earlier, so a new northern roundabout, an extension to Pickpye Drive and an extension to Towerfield Drive were more than capable actually of accommodating the additional traffic movements that would be generated by the new development, such that we wouldn't need to use Bickley Down Road. There's options for how we might deal with that. Obviously, we're looking to cross Bickley Down Road as part of our primary street infrastructure. There's all manner of ways in which we can deal with that detail on Bickley Down Road. But the objective there is to ensure that it's maintained for walking, cycling. The amount of people I've seen walking their dogs up and down Bickley Down Road when I've been out on site, that's the character I want to retain, and it's important therefore that we protect that from new development. So we'll be looking at that in a lot more detail, I think, with officers as we go forward. And finally, just touching briefly on phasing and construction. Dominic has submitted some very pretty drawings to support his submissions. As an engineer, I asked him to be a little bit more black and white, and on the right-hand side there is an example of the technical submissions that we'll be making as part of the planning application. This is the scheme for the new northern roundabout access. I thought that would be quite useful to put up to give you an idea of the kind of work that we're doing. So we've done a huge amount of modelling work on that to ensure that it not only works today, but thinking about background traffic growth over the next 15, 20 years, what does that look like in terms of the amount of traffic going up and down the Tavistock Road, put on 2,000 houses, again, how much traffic will that generate, and ensuring that all of that is assessed as one, and ensuring that that roundabout has sufficient capacity to be able to work. So that's the solution that we've come up with. We've also looked at ensuring that not only does it cater for cars, but obviously that it's, again, safe for people to walk and cycle around. So that's been quite a key consideration in the evolution of that junction. As part of the access strategy, we've looked at New Road and what role does New Road have as part of the wider access for this development. And I think we quite early on in the process, establishing a major new junction in this location meant that we had to think quite carefully about New Road. Did it stay where it was? Do we incorporate it within the master plan somehow? Do we enlarge the junction onto the A386? And actually, I think the best solution here is for us to close that off onto the A386. I know from the neighbourhood plan that it's quite a key accident hotspot. So ensuring that we can improve the safety of that through closing it, providing a much safer alternative route through our new proposed streets, I think is a much better solution to that location. In terms of phasing as well, whilst we're not fixing the phasing during this outline application stage, through the planning and the master planning and the assessment work that underpins the transport assessment, we've been working on assumptions and planning for that first phase of development taking place at the northern end of the site. So again, working that through the numbers of the transport assessment, but also the strategy and infrastructure needs for that. Will they be served by buses? Do we need to make improvements to bus stops in that location where we are? Do we need to provide better pedestrian cycle connections along the A386 and back into the Woolwell community? Well, yes, we do, and yes, we are. So all of that's formed quite an important role in actually designing that junction, so that'll be part of our formal submission. In terms of construction routing, again, with construction at the northern end of the site, New Road may actually, at the very start of the development, form that construction route into the site. And from there, we can use the primary infrastructure as it is built out or construction haul roads through the development to ensure that we're minimising the need for any construction traffic to come through the existing communities. So that seems to be, there's a significant amount more work needed to be done on construction routing and control. But that seems to be the start, I think, of a really good strategy for us to move forward on. As Dominic mentioned earlier, I think there's a need to control construction activities, appreciating that whilst the construction industry itself is now significantly better than it was previously in terms of their processes, procedures and general awareness, I think, of their social and environmental impacts. Actually, I think it's important that there's controls put in place by South Hams District Council through the process to ensure that there are some rigid rules in place about what routes these vehicles should take, the hours within which they're able to make those movements, how do they control dust, how do they control noise. All of these things will be set out and agreed through a construction environmental management plan, and that will be produced in due course. I don't have the details with me today. That's me on transport.
Thank you. I'm conscious, Mr. Chair, of time, so and I still feel that we've only just scratched the surface of, if we were to try and describe all the work that we've done today. Earlier this year, we quite correctly, for a scheme of this size, were requested by officers to be involved in the design review panel process. That process, for those of you that haven't either seen it or been aware of it, is where an independent series of architects, landscape architects, engineers, in this case some very high-level transport experts, are invited to come in. We are asked to present to them what we're doing, how we're doing it, and very often those events take place half a day. They're 3 or 4 hours, a morning or an afternoon, and the people that we're presenting to haven't seen the site, they've rushed from somewhere else, they don't necessarily, they don't have the facts, they don't have the knowledge, they will have less than you have already had today. And that makes it very difficult to make it productive, to make it qualitative. We do it, of course, we have to, it's good. This was different, again, officers, and with the greatest respect, they're sitting next to me, so I'll be careful what I say, but it was very clear that we had to do something slightly different. And what we agreed with them was that we would do this process over 2 days, which sounds very time intensive, and it was. That we would take the first day and we would take the experts out onto site. We'd do a proper site walk. If I remember on the day, some of us had proper footwear, some of us didn't, and some regretted that. But it was really good. It meant that we could walk the whole site with them. We took them up to see the long views from the national park, and we gave them presentations about what we'd done to date, about the landscape, work, about the whole interactions that had taken place. We then gave them time to think about that, assimilate it, ponder on it, and we came back, and for the second day we did a workshop. And I think that was really productive. We get very close to you can't see the wood for the trees, you get very close to it. And to have people come and suddenly say, well, why is it like that? Well, isn't there another way of doing that? Really, really helpful. And there were 3 primary aspects that came out of that. I mean, again, I'm conscious of the time, so let me canter through this. It is important, I think. And it's important because it answers some of the questions about how do you control the design quality? How do you instill, even at the early outline application stage, some core principles that have to be adhered to? So I've already mentioned the word street, our primary organising element, and the panel were very interested in the nature of that street. I talked about it being a boulevard, a tree-lined street. Green element is important. The first question that came back to me is that relevant to this part of the world? Is that part of the character of this part of the world? And I had to back up to actually, I'm not sure that it is. So what we've done is we've modified our thinking, and we've still got trees and greenery in this street, but it's not such a formalised approach. And that's what I mean about sometimes you're so close to it, you don't see it. And what we've done, this drawing basically shows you that whilst we'll have a street which is consistent in its length, with lighting and street furniture and the way that it's designed, it will be designed as one piece. Actually, it will have different characteristics. At the very northern end of Tavistock Road, the first section won't have any built form on its left-hand side. It'll be looking out over landscape. That in itself should influence how the design of that road and the footpath and the cycleway occur. Once you've reached this point here, we're almost on the crossing point of the tramway, and you're into the core of the scheme, the higher of the densities. You've got buildings on both sides. I think that takes a different characteristic. And whilst that central section there looks like quite a long straight piece of road, actually, if you think about those bigger plans that we were seeing, there are lots of existing roads that are much longer than that. And yes, we'll need to employ skillful design. We'll need to get the design speed down to 20 miles an hour. I think so, certainly. If it's 30 when you enter, it's got to get down to 20 as soon as possible. And the use of different materials, the use of narrow, the use of traffic. This needs to be designed as a piece. Even if it's delivered in sections, the strategy and the thinking and the instruction behind it in the design codes needs to be at this stage. And that's effectively what the design review panel was saying. Where this road crosses the centre, the primary school, the local centre, that again is a design piece in itself. It needs to be pedestrian dominated. It needs to, the vehicles that are crossing this position need to feel like they're the invited guests. They can't just roll through there as they feel. They are the invited guests. This is a pedestrian zone. I'm not talking about our town centres where pedestrianisation ban cars. It's a very delicate balance. And then to the south of that, south is a bit of just Norfolk pie plantation. You've probably got a bit more of the core. You've got a bit more of the sort of brother and sister happening on either side of the centre. And then I think we've got a very important, and I wouldn't call it the second entrance, the other entrance on Pig Pie Drive. That road as it exists, as you get to the end, has a particular character about its width, its verges, its vegetation. And I think we need to make that transition quite soft, and I think we need to be careful how we do that. So what the panel started to ask us, and I think the officers were in full support, and we are as well, is that we define this street to a much greater extent than we would normally do for an outline planning application. They were also very interested in the idea of the green fins and how that idea relates to this whole discussion about the quality of that road, of that street, of that corridor. And this is a simple diagram of showing. What I think is perhaps more important is when you start to look at the illustrative master plan with the road coming through the middle through the centre, the primary school, and down past Pickpie Plantation. These pieces that we're introducing for a reason of visual, for structure, for visual containment, actually can play a really important part. You imagine driving along this road and you get to a narrowing, vegetation on either side, you go through that into the next portion of development. This, I hope, will be one of the techniques that stops this just being a complete sort of homogeneous housing layout. It'll actually have some inherent character into it. And this may not seem like a big deal, an existing hedgerow that's reinforced, that pinches as the road goes through it. But this is what will give this place character, and this is what will allow us to talk about orientation in a very positive way. This is the version of the drawing that I showed you, the purple drawing that I showed you earlier on, which looks at the different contours and their levels. It's a heat diagram, blue being the lowest land, red, pinky being the highest land. And again, you can see the point that I made earlier on about the existing sports pitches and the area that is closest to the existing Woolwell Centre being the high ground, and then the lower ground wrapping around it. The reason for showing you that again and mentioning it is not because I want to show you a better looking drawing. It's because the second of the items that the design review panel asked us to look more closely at, and indeed we'd already been asked by officers and a councillor to look at this in more detail and to prove to them that we could make this work. And that is the question of how do you build housing, roads, streets, blocks on what is a sloping site, and in some cases a really steeply sloping site. And the only way you can do that is to really start to do a bit of layout work, to test it, to start drawing the cross sections through the site, and to actually start to understand how back gardens facing back to back with housing facing out onto a street, housing facing out onto our main street, how does that actually get accommodated in level terms? Well, this drawing is quite brutal, if I can use that word, in that it takes the level change out in the houses. So we may have some split level houses. The issue is it's easy to draw the section. It's when you get to the end and the roads start to connect with each other. And if you go to the scheme that's just outside the council offices here, you'll see some of those details in action. You'll see where it's worked, and you'll also see where they didn't get it right. And in our outline application, we want to use good and bad photos to actually explain how you should do this, how the next set of design teams that are working on this project need to approach this task. I did say earlier on when I was looking at the plan through the school and the local centre that I'd show you a cross-section. So if I can just orientate, here is the existing tramway. So if you were walking along here now, you'd be in this position with the Devonshire banks and the vegetation on either side, and the land would be sloping away on your eastern, your right-hand side as looking at the section. And this is where the community park will be. So you'll be able to access the community park anywhere along the tramway. From that position there, where the cursor is, to that position there, effectively is our school site. This is the main street. This is the spine road that's going through the scheme that we've been looking at. And here might be the local centre, with new community building and with sports facilities stretching back up towards the existing Woolwell Centre and Pickpie Plantation. You can see that whatever you do on this site, you have to be smart in design terms. You have to work with the levels. Now, I have been given a little bit of a, well, I wouldn't say a telling off, that would be wrong, but what I was suggesting with this sketch is that actually this building could be an exemplar in terms of green architecture, in terms of sustainability. It doesn't have to be expensive just because it's green, but if you think about those long distance views that are coming across here, we've taken the opportunity to take a big bite of green out of the development area and position the school there. Hey, let's go the whole hog. Let's make sure that the building itself is nestling into the landscape and says something about the opportunity of building this close to some great views. You know, if you're sitting in a classroom here, you might have trouble concentrating on your lesson because you're going to be looking at some pretty amazing views out of this school. The third point, final point, we are asked to look at the character of the site in a bit more detail. And the character breaks down into these three areas. So we've started to define the characteristics: density, building height. So for example, on this northern edge, the lighter buff colour, you'll notice that on Parkland, which is the name of that character area, the height restriction is 2 stories. That's a very straight, simple instruction. If that gets followed through into the design, into the outline application and the site-wide design code, there's not a lot to not understand about that instruction. And the local character study that we talked about before will be applied to this in a number of ways. And a flat diagram like that is good, the instruction is better, but actually what it really needs is to understand how for Parkland, for Central Court and for Woodland Edge, the building form starts to actually be instructed. Now this is very much work in progress, and I'll come on to the code in a minute, but we are getting close to the end, you'll be glad to know. If you look at the note on the bottom of this drawing, not for inclusion in the outline application, you may say, well, why is he showing it to us then? Well, we've got different densities, we've got different relationships to green, to edge, to main street, and we have started moving right through the scales to actually start testing some of the parcels that exist on the site to make sure that they work, to prove that the housing mix works, to prove that the car parking ratios, which are difficult, I have to say, I won't beat around the bush, can be applied, will be applied, and whilst they're not included in the application, they can of course be shared with officers to review what happens at the southern end of the site. How do these units relate to the attenuation ponds beyond? So really this was just to say to you, look, whilst these may not be in the application, that work has been done and has been assessed. And this is an extract from the code document as it starts to emerge, where we're actually starting to look at the architectural form. And on the very edge of the settlement, if this colour here, which comes out slightly grey, actually it's better on the main screen, it's a buffy colour, and here it's a sort of horrible dull grey, but this buff colour, if that is stone, then let's really use stone well. We're not going to use it over the whole site, that's not commercially viable. So use it where it is important, use it in the best places. And if on certain edges of the scheme, facing sensitive views, the edge garden walls can be made of stone, the gable of a building can be made of stone, and that composition considered as one complete piece, not as a series of individual houses and a random layout, then this is where we want to be heading to with some of the instruction. Now, bear this in mind because the next slide is, it's the second last slide, you'll be glad to know, but this is a really important question. How do you control design quality? So we put in with the application the illustrative master plan, and everyone says, oh, that looks fantastic, and you've done lots of testing on levels, topography and block types. But the really important question is, when applications do come in the future, how do the officers, what tools do they have at their disposal to say, well, that's not what we talked about in the developer forum back in September 2019, that's not what we've talked about in previous design sessions. That was always going to be a big discussion for us. Late in, I suppose it was 2018, I sat with the urban designers at offices, and we really worked out that if we were trying to put all of the information in at this stage, we were going to come up with a problem, and I won't beat around the bush. The Sherford example was discussed and used as a kind of example. And what we've decided to do between us as the best way forward, and I do buy into this, is that with the outline application we'll have a site-wide design code. There will be the approval, if it happens, of the outline planning application. And then before the detail layouts come in, there will be area master plans and area design codes. And they will give a greater level of instruction. Not necessarily phase by phase. It's probably likely to be phase by phase, but it doesn't have to be. So the site-wide design code, the piece at the top of this slide, submitted with the outline application, sister document with the design and access statement, will establish all these strategies for character, movement, landscape, drainage, and it will include things like public art, play, health and well-being, some of the things we identified at the beginning. And importantly, the discussion that I had with Mark here at SHDC was, can we sort of set the specification for the next level? So somebody reading that document who is about to embark on the area master plan and area design code stage will know precisely what the authority is looking for. It will say, here is a strategy for character. And it defines some of those sketches that I've showed to you. What it will also say in a box is, at the area master plan stage, we, the authority, will expect to see this, this, this and this. We'll expect to see a more detailed plan. We'll expect you to define important corners. We'll expect you to define setbacks. We will be on this. We have a method for dealing with this. And when that comes forward, as I said, it doesn't have to be phase by phase, but probably will be, that will establish a greater level of detail. And as I said to you before, at the risk of repetition, a lot of this thinking comes out of the experience of Sherford, and this lies in front of us. So what are the next steps? I do feel, even though I've been talking for a long time, that we've only scratched some of the surface, really, but you'll probably be glad to get to the end. Submissions can start this autumn. There's a 16, correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, there's a 16-week determination period, but you know, we're not foolish. We know that it will take a lot longer than that. There will be work that will be done during that period. There'll be more work on transport. I will be asked questions about character, about landscape, about all of these subjects. So we will need to be providing additional information. But at the moment, we would envisage, we would hope that there's a year's period so that perhaps the application can be determined in late 2020. That would mean that detailed design, the area master plan code, the detailed first phase can be being designed in 2021, commencement on site, perhaps early 2022, and the first homes occupied in 2022, so 3 years away effectively. And the reason we put this on there is because we're always asked that question. We're certainly asked by the public at the events that we attend, so we thought we'd put it up there as our last slide. So I know we've done a lot of talking, and I have overrun, and I do apologise for that, but I think that we passed all that information over to you, and I know you've got, Chair, it's a question and answer session now. So.
Thank you, Dominic, for that. Is everybody comfortable? Do they want 2 or 3 minutes before we start? Or are we going to carry right on? No? Right. I'm going to ask Councillor Nikki Hopwood to come back first, if that's okay. So I know she has a set of questions. I hope that the presentation has answered quite a lot of your questions anyway.
Thank you, Chairman. Whether it has or hasn't is irrelevant. I shall say what I was going to say anyway. No, I don't think it has. Thank you. So, thank you, Chairman. As the member representing the Woolwell ward, I would firstly start by saying that this meeting should have been held in Woolwell and not Follaton House. And in future, if any meetings are arranged that affect a significant amount of residents in a ward, then the local ward member should be consulted before any invites go out to discuss where meetings should be held. We as a council should go out to the community and not expect the community to come to us. I am glad that the council has set up live streaming today, so those residents who want to can at least see what is going on if they could not make the 50-mile round trip to Totnes. Chairman, residents have always been opposed to this development, but since the adoption of the joint local plan and the land allocation being included in this plan, there is nothing any of us can do now to stop it. We need to concentrate our efforts on the content of the application and make the most out of the cards we have been dealt, and make sure we heavily influence the development going forward. I think what has been really unclear through the whole of this presentation we've just sat through is that there are actually 3 landowners. There are 3 landowners in the area of land as allocated through the joint local plan. Mr. Hitchens with a holding of 11.42 hectares, which includes the playfields that are precious to local residents. Plymouth City Council, which for residents' benefits is the site behind the CSA, affectionately known as the Rabbit Field, of 11.72 hectares. And Maristow Land, which is 117.51 hectares and controlled by yourselves, Barwood. The total of all 3 landowners' land is 140.65 hectares, or in old money is 347.55 acres. All this land has been designated for up to 2,000 homes, 1,565 to be delivered in the life of the 2016 to 2034 joint local plan. Woolwell at the moment has 1,295 homes, so this development will not just be an extension to Woolwell, it will be a major extension to the area in which we live. Residents have been consulted on the development, progressing with all 3 landowners working together. However, you are moving forward on your own, Barwood, as Mr. Hitchens has pulled out and his land was and still is key to this whole development in the residents' eyes, as it is playfields that he has given public access to for as many years as anyone can remember. I do not believe that previous consultation events are valid, nor should they be referred to in any planning application. I have serious concerns that if this land is brought forward under a separate application, then houses will be put on some of the open space that residents wanted protected. You, Barwood, are proposing 2,000 homes on less land. So if Mr. Hitchens comes forward with a proposal, then that will tip over the 2,000 houses, and we could end up with more than the allocation of 2,000, maybe 2,500. This land also has the flattest topography, is the highest point of the JLP land allocation, and it is from here, inwards and outwards, that the view from Dartwood will mostly be affected. A new consultation needs to take place with residents and all interested parties to bring everyone up to date with the present situation. You are going to put in an application, leaving one landowner and his land out completely, and you're putting in an application separately on land owned by Plymouth City Council, but are having to serve a Certificate B, which is an intention to submit an application on third-party land on them, as you do not have their agreement to put in an application on land owned by them with yours. To be clear, at the beginning, 4 years ago, there were 3 landowners, and now you seem to have disregarded 2 of them and are going it alone. How can you show how many houses could fit on one landowner's land that you do not control, i.e. Plymouth City Council, and not the other, Mr. Hitchens' land? It is not up to you to say that Plymouth City Council can have 350, 400 houses of the 2,000 on their land, and then the land with the playfields on you have totally discounted from your scheme and not taken into account that land at all. Why have you not served Mr. Hitchens with a Certificate B and put in an application on his land as well as the Plymouth City Council land? In disregarding Mr. Hitchens' land completely, can we have public assurance that you will not landlock his land, thus forcing him into a position he may not want to be forced into, so that in the future he may consider, instead of a housing and sports facility, he may consider maybe a housing and sports facility there with direct access as well as playfields. I have tried to split my concerns about the rest of the application into categories. So here goes. Phasing. There has been no clear indication of how the development will be phased. Indeed, how can you when actually you are now in control and working with only one landowner? It is of significant importance to residents that they are involved in how the development should be phased, due mainly to the fact that there is only one road in and out of Woolwell. So residents are looking for an assurance that a new access will be built before any building takes place, not only for access to the houses, but as importantly for construction traffic entering the site, with neither new residential or construction traffic going through Woolwell as it stands at the moment. Under PLY 44, you are required to consult residents on phasing before a planning application is submitted, but to date you have not. Indeed, if there could be 3 separate applications, each application will have its own phasing plan. What is to stop all 3 landowners bringing their land forward at the same time and buildings starting in all 3 landowners' area at the same time? As you are aware, I am keen for phasing to be from Roborough sweeping over towards Woolwell. But if, say, for instance, Plymouth City Council put in their application separately, that would enable them to bring their land forward, and construction would then start in 2 points of the land allocation, Roborough and Woolwell, which would not be acceptable to the community and cannot be allowed to happen. The Plymouth City Council land needs to come forward with your land, and Plymouth City Council need to join you in phasing the site. The same applies to Mr. Hitchens' land, else you could have 3 landowners bringing their individual parcels of land forward for building at the same time, which would actually mean all 3 of you could have your own phasing plan and the sweeping approach just would not happen. Amenities and school. There seems to be very little or no information on the trigger points for community amenities, and residents need assurance that the primary school will be built nearer the beginning of the development, as our local Bickley Down Primary School is full and oversubscribed every year. Please make sure that ample parking is provided for the school. This again goes back to 3 landowners. Who does what to trigger amenities? Community park. Will there be ample parking for visitors to the community park? Can you give assurance that there will be suitable pathways for wheelchairs and pushchairs? Oh, please, that's another sheet gone. Are there going to be links to Canwood for those walking or cycling? How will all your green spaces be managed so they don't become a burden on the pocket to residents that are going to live there, bearing in mind that half the development alone will be a community park? Housing numbers. You are proposing to put 2,000 homes on less land and say that this will not impact the density. Of course it will affect the density. You have less land but still 2,000 houses. Can I ask, please, what were the density figures under 3 landowners and what are they under just 1, Maristow? You cannot count the Plymouth City Council land, as you do not have their permission at this time to include them in any development. If you did, you wouldn't have to serve a Section B. You have less land, and I am concerned that you will not give enough parking for larger properties as you have less land now. The Bickley Parish Council Neighbourhood Plan states in BIC 18, 1 to 2 bedroom homes should have a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces and 3 to 4 bed homes a minimum of 3 off-street parking spaces. Although South Hams don't have a parking policy, the neighbourhood plan will be taken into consideration by South Hams Planning when looking at an application. This will also be land hungry. Again, I go back to 1 landowner signed up and not all 3. Infrastructure. If you don't have Plymouth City Council and Mr Hitchings on board, how can you guarantee to deliver the infrastructure needed for such a large development? How will you make sure everything promised is delivered when there will be less money in the pot? Transport assessment. I am disappointed that the transport assessment has still not been concluded. You have had 4 years to do this. Have talks been held with Citybus about connectivity through the site? And how would they best serve residents? If so, can we please have sight of these discussion notes? You will not encourage the likes of residents in Belvoir to use buses that go through Woolwell, as they have an excellent service that goes straight down the A386 at the moment. So as per your presentation, you cannot rely on them. I hope that Plymouth City Council are treating the A386 upgrade as a top priority and realise that very little, if anything at all, can be built before the A386 road upgrade is completed. The A386 cannot and that makes no sense, and not be the main access in and out of Woolwell. And the main access in and out of Woolwell, as long as the A386 access cannot take any more traffic. Climate change emergency. South Hams, West Devon and Plymouth City Councils separately have recently declared a climate change emergency. But you have not publicly consulted on a design code, which I presume would indicate measures to mitigate climate change, such as air source, solar, insulation. Will there be charging points for electric vehicles? Policy PLY 44 requires consultation on a design code before an application is submitted, but you have not consulted residents. New housing developments should aspire to achieve net zero emissions and be innovative in the way houses are constructed. Are you going to lead the way and set an example of exemplar building by trying to reduce carbon emissions in your development? Self-build plots. PLY 44 recognises that there is a need for self-build dwellings. How are you going to facilitate these? As to up until this point, there have been no discussions around this aspect of the policy. The Bickley Parish Council Neighbourhood Plan Policy BIC 15 also makes reference to self-build plots. Homes for local people. People who move to Woolwell tend to move around within the area, but there is an insufficient mix of housing. There are only a handful of bungalows in Woolwell at the moment, and what is needed are small 1 and 2 bed bungalows on the flat and close to the local centre of both the new and existing community. So as families grow and then leave home, the parents, if they wish, can downsize as they get older and still stay in the area, should they so wish. This has not been mentioned in any discussion, but needs to be included in your planning application. Broadband connectivity. Can you give assurance that high-speed internet connection will be delivered on site, enabling working from home in a modern community? Devon has the highest self-employment rate in the country, which is 14%, and to do some or all of their work from home, they will need a guaranteed high-speed connectivity. Pickby Drive. There is a proposed connection road at the Hammerhead at the end of Pickby Drive connecting the two communities together, which is a requirement of PLY 44. Residents believe that this will end up being a rat run. Can you look at alternative ways to connect the two communities without using this road and feedback your findings? Health and well-being. Have you considered the implications on the local hospital, doctors, and dentists with such a large development? I would have thought that Derriford Hospital is at breaking point, with the numbers of houses there are being built at this end of the city and the Sherford development now moving on at a pace. Have discussions taken place with the clinical commissioning group to see what can be done to mitigate stretching our hospital even more? In your amenity space, you're proposing a doctor's surgery. Have discussions taken place with the clinical commissioning group to see if they will take the space and put a surgery in there? And if so, where do they propose to take doctors from, as there is a national shortage of qualified doctors? Allotments. Residents asked for allotments to serve the existing and new community, but up until today they weren't shown on the plan. As I understand, you were having difficulty fitting them in. Could this be because you're squeezing more houses on less land? Indeed, is that why you're going up to 3 and 4 story houses? Will gardens be big enough to enable those residents who want to grow their own vegetables? Between homeowners, gardens and allotments, growing food will help reduce our carbon footprint and help those residents who wish to reduce their food miles and become more self-sufficient. Existing wildlife. What steps are you going to take to mitigate about the impact on wildlife? I have already referred to one field as the rabbit field, a parcel of land that has rabbits in abundance. Where will they go? There is a vast deer population which many residents are fond of, but you will urbanise some of their environment, thus meaning they live in more danger than now of being run over on roadways. How will you stop them coming up into the residential developments, thus protecting them? Have you made sufficient provision for other wildlife, bats, dormice or plant life that will be destroyed when building starts? To conclude, Chairman, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and please do not tell me that all this will be dealt with in the reserved matters of the planning application. After your last public event in around 2019, you did set up a web page that was going to be where you kept residents up to date on what was happening. You committed to put a regular bulletin on that page so residents could keep up to date with what was happening and what you as a developer have been doing. To date, you have put one bulletin on that website, and that was just after the consultation event. Residents deserve more. They deserve to be consulted on the true position of land ownership and who is in and who is out. They deserve to be consulting on phasing and the design code. And lastly, residents deserve a say in a development that is nearly twice the size of the one in which they live. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hotwood. I think there's probably enough questions in that statement to last until about midnight. I am going to make a suggestion. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, that the gentleman go away, have time to consider those questions and give us a written report with those questions, with answers on them, because we're going to be here a long time otherwise. Is that acceptable to everybody else? Because, well, if they're in writing, if black and white, they're far better than they are if you have a verbal. If there are any other questions here that haven't been covered by Councillor Hotwood, I'm quite prepared to take them. That's not what I'm saying. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. I think this is quite a minor question after what we've just heard. But I was perturbed to see that 2.5 and 3-storey houses are being proposed everywhere. 2.5 storey everywhere and 3-storey in the central core. Sorry, I should say everywhere except the most northernmost section. Because I'm struggling to understand where 2.5 and 3-storey houses are the norm in Woolwell at the moment. Now, don't refer me down to the George or along the Tavistock Road, because I know there are some there, but I think on this particularly sensitive site facing out onto the National Park, I'm wondering whether this is acceptable. I think a street scene of 2 storeys is acceptable, and sometimes when the land falls away, there may be room to have a lower ground floor on the backs because the land is falling away. But again, I think this looks like it's a constraint because of the reduced amount of land that you're working to. And I was also very perturbed to see that you were proposing up to 55 dwellings per hectare, because again, on a fringe of city site, that would seem far too dense to me.
Gentlemen, do you want a chance to come back on some of those questions? If you can keep it brief, you understand why.
Yeah, I do. It's a good question. With the application, the parameter plans set out the maximum heights of building development. And certainly, Councillor Hotwood said 4-storey. There's no plan for 4-storey. But I take your point that the 3-storey itself, if it was built as a continual line, wouldn't be appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate. I think what we need to do is get with your officers, get the balance right, whereby the approved plans can allow a street to go up to 3 storeys, but perhaps only for certain parts of it, key corners, or perhaps a specific run. I think we need to find a way that answers your question so that you are confident that you will not get applications coming in which are simply carpet bombing 2.5 and 3-storey buildings. That's quite a delicate moment to find that place. I understand the question. I understand what the answer should be. I think we have to work with your officers to make sure we get that right in the application. Just to reiterate, I don't believe it is appropriate for full 3 and 2.5-storey buildings to run along long lengths of street. To add to you, the point about 55 dwellings per hectare, the average is 37 DPH, or dwellings per hectare, across the site. We want to make sure that we can get down to 15, 20 dwellings per hectare in certain more sensitive parts. And the 55 is really relevant to the local centre, where the units there would be apartments, and apartments inevitably create a bigger density. So again, I think on the plans that are submitted, there must be a very clear explanation of that point. There must be a very clear definition that if it is a tiny area, the local centre, then that only applies to that area. And that instruction would give your officers the ability to control that as applications come in. The two-tier design code has a part to play in this. When you get to the area master plans and area codes, and layouts are beginning to be fixed, that is the time to analyse those very points. They've already been instructed in the outline, and you can start to actually interrogate what that street scene would be like. And I think that's an important point to do that. To pick up the point about are we putting up those densities to accommodate the housing, I think it's more complicated than well, it's not more complicated than that. We've looked at the whole site. We know there are areas where you can do certain things. Councillor Hotwood was right. The Hitchins land is the flattest part of the site. It is closest to the existing settlement. Therefore, that you would perhaps expect to work harder with the densities and the storey heights there. But that's not a reason to do it. there has to be the character study, there has to be the position within the overall scheme. So I don't think we've immediately said, oh, you need to put some more houses, therefore we turn the density dial up. It's a little bit more site-specific than that. But I do agree with your point about we have to have a mechanism whereby you can't just have 3-storey buildings along whole lengths of streets. That's not right. That's not the character we're talking about.
Thank you. Councillor Holloway, can you make your mic available to the lady who's in yellow at the back, please? Switch it on. If you could just say who you are, give us your name and your question, please.
Yeah, my name's Glenys Eventual. I'm a resident of Woolwell, so thank you very much to Councillor Hopwood for putting forward such a very robust statement there. I just wanted to ask the gentleman from the developers about Pickpie Drive. I live in one of the houses that look over, my back garden looks over Pickpie Drive. To say it is already far too busy is understatement. We have the boy racers that regularly zoom up and down to the end of the road, turn around and come back. We have the deer running up and down. School times, because there's very little parking outside Bickley Down, they tend to park along the main road. The care home staff park along the main road. So I don't know if you've actually even bothered to walk along Pickpie Drive at rush hour. Not just when you've turned up from wherever you've come from, but I'm talking between 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock, then 3 till 5, and then 5:30 till 8 o'clock in the evening. I leave to go to work, and I only work in the centre of Plymouth in Stonehouse. So I leave to go to work and drop my son off at the station at 7:20. I still don't get to my office till 8:30, 25 to 9. I leave work at 5 o'clock. If I'm in by 6:10, I'm lucky. So without the added pile-on of all the houses and the extra, and I don't like the fact you keep calling it a street. That's political mumbo-jumbo. It's a main road, and it's going to be a big main road right through that development. And when you get to Pickpie Drive, you suddenly stop. You're carefully not putting the rest of the road going right through the estate, past the school, past the nursing home, where there's already cars parking either side of the road, so you can't get through there, to the top of Towerfield Drive, where the CSA empties out. You're lucky if you can get on or off the estate at tipping out time. So I would like you to at least say that you will seriously look properly at whether or not it is appropriate to put an extension to Woolwell, which, as Nikki has pointed out, is twice the size of the development we already have. 2,000 homes, you can say as much as you like, we'll put an extra bus on. People are not going to use the buses living that far out of town to go into town. They're just not. One, they're too expensive. They're not as frequent as you have, and half the time they don't even turn up. We've often seen people waiting for buses. So I think you do need to reconsider that, because I think you are underestimating the feeling of the residents in Woolwell, and you've shown a lack of respect, a total disrespect for us by holding it here. We've had to take days off work to do this, to come out just so we can hear what was said. So I think it does need to be reconsidered, because I think you're going to face far more disruption than you possibly think you're going to. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do you want to come back at all on that?
Well, we were told that the presentation was here, so I don't think we've shown anybody any disrespect, but I understand the point that Nikki made earlier on. The other point about had I taken the time to walk along the road from wherever I came from, yeah, I have. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing that now for 4 years. I don't mean on a regular basis every day. Because we've had events that have started early in the morning, because we've had events which are finished after dark, then I hope that we've seen all aspects of what happens along that road. I mean, I have been stopped and asked what I was doing on that road. I think somebody was quite suspicious of me just standing there. That's not the answer to your question, though. The answer to your question is that in the consultation, I spoke to a lot of your neighbours and fellow residents who live off the road, not necessarily on Pickpie Drive itself. And I had a conversation about this subject. And they made the same points that you made. And at that stage, I did go back to the team, and we did talk about this with the authority, with the officers, about whether the whole link through from Tavistock Road to Pickpye Drive needed to be continuous to allow vehicles to do a full loop, whether you couldn't put a break in it so that people came in from the north and came in from Pickpye Drive, where that break was central, where the local centre and the school is, so you were kind of doing a 50-50, or whether actually you moved the break right the way down, adjacent to Pickpye Drive, maybe even Pickpye Plantation, sorry, maybe even further around to the point where you hit the end of Pickpye Drive. And I think there are technical reasons why that wouldn't work, but I can assure, and perhaps Neil will explain that, but I can assure you that we had some of those discussions. I am conscious that that is a major issue for residents. We didn't just ignore it. We would love to come up with a solution. I mentioned the school, the primary school, earlier on, and looking at that as an off-site piece. Maybe we need to expand that strategy from the roundabout, through the roundabout, all the way along that road, and have a plan that deals with all of that in one go. And maybe there are some benefits that can be brought in terms of safety, in terms of parking, in terms of people who work along that. You mentioned the care home. So we haven't just ignored it. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. But yeah.
Thank you, Dominic. You've probably jumped on my sword there. I imagine the lady was referring to me in terms of walking and cycling up and down the road. But likewise, like with Dominic, for the last 3 years, I've walked up and down, cycled up and down, got the bus up and down, driven up and down to get a really good feel for the local areas. A chartered transport planner, it's my role to present the facts and the evidence to inform decisions. So I've done so in a very independent way, in a way that makes sure that what we're presenting is robust. So I hope that's come across, and of course across all times of the day, including at school drop-off and pick-up times, of course, all important. But yeah, coming back to your specific question, if we have looked at this, as Dominic said at the public consultation exercise, the question was posed to us. We have looked at what would it mean if we didn't solve Woolwell's current problem of being a cul-de-sac. What if we just left Woolwell as a cul-de-sac on its own? What if we just created our own new cul-de-sac off of a new roundabout off of Roebury Village? Technically, in terms of can the traffic get in and out, yes, we can get the traffic in and out of the new development, but actually that's not the vision for Woolwell. That's not presenting a coherent, joined up community. That's creating the them and us. We wanted to ensure that the movement network of the whole of the Woolwell, the new and the existing part, that created route options. That allowed people to move however they wanted through the development, be it by car, by walking or cycling, or by bus. So we've gone from we're sort of focusing on allowing for those route options. Yes, things happen. Sometimes there's a crash, or there's roadworks, or the local utility companies digging up the road, and that causes massive disruption. So providing those route options, allowing the other ways in and out of the development, however you're travelling, I think is a good thing. So we've done the number crunching, we've tested it. Yes, it works, but is it the right thing to do? I'm not convinced. But we can continue to have those conversations with officers and members to ensure that we've got a balanced view of what is the right access strategy. But we have looked at it.
Thank you. Councillor Panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going into detail a little bit more, can you give me an impression of the street scene that you envisage on the residential roads, whatever you're calling them? Will there be pavements? Will there not be pavements and shared use between pedestrians and cars? And how, if that is the case, will we see this conflict between pedestrians, pushchairs, buggies and vehicles?
Do you want me to deal with that? You go first. Yeah, okay. Dominic could have shared the emerging design code with you in, I think, previous presentations, where we tried to, indeed, the design review panel presentation focused a lot on the primary street and how that's coming forward. But there'll be a road hierarchy that's identified within the design code and looks at the function of those streets and the level of provision that will be provided dependent on its role and its function, including things like carriageway widths, what the speed limit will be, are they street lit, is there on-street parking or not, those sorts of things. But indeed, in terms of footways, yes, there'll be footways throughout continuously. You might get some very small areas of sort of shared driveways that you wouldn't have footways, but apart from that, throughout the site, the plan is for footways. The main street itself, I think, will be a maximum of 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour certainly through the local centre around the primary school area. We need to talk to Devon in more detail. They may want 20 throughout the whole lot, but we'll look at that in more detail. But in any event, we want to ensure, especially with getting people to and from the primary school, that we've got that segregated cycle facility as well. So along the main street, there'll be a segregated foot cycleway provided on one side of the road and a footway on the other. Beyond that, into sort of the residential streets, cyclists will be encouraged to cycle on the carriageway, but those will be much lower traffic. There'll be probably a maximum of 20 miles an hour, if not reduced speeds through those as well. So it should be a very safe environment.
I think one of the keys to planning and development of this scale, and it could be anywhere in the country in this sense, is the word variety. So whether the question's about streetscape and or whether it's about built form, you've got to have variety, and you've got to be able to instruct that to a degree. Otherwise, it just becomes a homogeneous mass, and it could be any housing layout anywhere in the country. So I think, as Neil rightly says, you establish a street hierarchy, you establish the block structure, the two things are intimately related, and you have a main spine street that we've talked about. It's not a very eloquent way of describing it, but our primary street, that's how you orientate yourself. Off that will be a series of loops. They will have footpaths. They will have all the kit that you would expect: lighting, signage, street furniture. You work down to the third level, which would be a series of probably quieter residential streets. And then the final level, I mean, we tend to call them lanes, but they are the shared surface. So when you get right to the edge of the development, where you're looking at the green landscape beyond, whether you're facing pick by plantation, so your view is terminated, or whether you've got a longer distance view, to get to those units, you would want to do some shared surface work. You would want the lowest of the hierarchy. You would want to design it as if it was a private drive, as if it was just servicing which it is, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses. The adopting authority probably wouldn't allow us to do it as a gravel driveway, but that would be my ultimate ambition if I could. And I think you've got to I hesitate to use the sort of home zone word. That's going to mean certain things, and I think it's very appropriate for very urban places. I'm not sure it's appropriate for the edges of this development where we want a kind of softer feel. I'd rather concentrate on the green stuff that's in those streets to lighten the feel of those streets. But they probably wouldn't have a dedicated footpath. They would be a shared surface. Of the percentage of the whole, I'm guessing, but it's probably 5 to 10%. Dealing with those edge conditions.
Thank you. Council panel, can you make your mic available to the gentleman in the checkered shirt behind you, please? Yes. If you could state your name, please.
Of course. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Anderson, and for many years I have represented the interests of Mr. Hitchens and the wider Team Hitchens efforts. Firstly, I'd like to thank Councillor Hopwood for a very, very comprehensive review of the total proposal, and I would urge you all vehemently to pay attention to everything that the good lady has said and respond accordingly. I have one point of clarification to make, and I have one very direct question to ask. The point of clarification is that at no time has Mr. Hitchens or any of his representatives sought to withdraw from any discussions with the two other landowners, being Plymouth City Council and the Maristow Estate. And in fact, discussions continue to ensure that ultimately, we hope, that some form of collaborative agreement will follow. The direct question, which I would urge you please to give me a direct answer, is as representatives of, albeit the majority landowner, but only one of the three, is it your intention to pursue an application, an outline application, that will absorb the total requirement of PLY 44, i.e. 2,000 homes? And an answer, yes or no, would be sufficient.
Mr. Chairman, if I can introduce myself, my name is Alistair MacDonald. I'm from a company called Boyer Planning. We are the planning consultants involved in the Barwood application, representing Barwood. Perhaps I can answer Mr. Anderson's question in terms of referring back to the wording of policy PLY 44. The wording of PLY 44 is not a maximum or a minimum, excuse me, of 2,000 dwellings. It's in the order of 2,000 dwellings. So that is the wording. So the applications that we are currently working on have a capacity of 2,000 dwellings. It will provide infrastructure as required by PLY 44, and the applications, including an application on Plymouth City land, will make appropriate contributions, and any future applications that may come forward will also make those appropriate contributions.
May I respond, please?
You may.
I take it that from your response to my question that it is your intent to proceed with a planning application, outline planning application, for a total scope in the order of 2,000 homes. Is that the position?
The applications will be for up to, outline applications for up to totaling 2,000 dwellings.
I'll take your answer as an affirmative to the question that I have posed, that you do intend to proceed with an application in the order of 2,000 homes. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Holloway, could you make your mic available to the gentleman behind you, please?
Keith Bales, resident of Woolwell. Going back to the question of Pickpie Drive and at the access, if you continue, I mean, the situation is that Woolwell Road now is virtually at capacity. If you continue to make access from this new development via Pickpie Drive to Woolwell Road, it's human nature. The majority of people on this new development will use Pickpie Drive and Woolwell Road as their quickest route to town. And the only answer I can see is possibly widening Woolwell Road, and that is going to affect the people who live on both sides of that road. Other than that, I think the only answer, although we don't want them and us, is to have a complete block and no access via Pickpie Drive and Woolwell Road to the A386. If you have that, then everybody, it's human nature to look for the shortest route to get into town, and they will use that route. They won't go back halfway towards Tavistock to come into Plymouth. Thank you. That's my. And are they going to allow that to happen?
Okay, I think you've really made your point. And I will say I'm going to say one thing now. As all the councillors are thinking who are sat here, we will know that the decision on whether that road is too busy or not will not be taken in this place. It will be taken by county highways, and they are the ones that you will need to lobby when it comes to. I'm afraid I don't disagree with what you're saying. Well, yeah, well, that will come up in time. We've listened to what you've said. We've heard what you've said, and I'm trying to give you, other than the councillors are here, you from Woolwell, a chance to speak, and I hope I'll continue to do that. Councillor Hopwood, you want to come back?
Absolutely, Chairman. I want to come back for two reasons. I want to come back because I'm going to get an answer to my questions via written representation, and just to let Miss Mitchell know that I have sent her a copy of my spiel, so she will be able to pick through it to answer the questions properly. I'm glad, I have to say, that I didn't get answers to them, because if it took as long to answer Mr. Anderson's question of 2,000 houses, yes or no, we could be here to midnight having answered my question. So I'm glad that that was taken. Be under no doubt, residents, Barwood are putting in an application of up to 2,000 homes on Plymouth City Council land and their land. Come what may, but they are putting in a separate application under a Certificate B on Plymouth City Council land as well, which has houses on it. And that makes up their 2,000 houses, which is why I go back to, and I apologise to Mr. Hitchens, we don't know why you're out of Barwood. So the terminology pulled out, I've used the wrong terminology, and I apologise for that. But I'm just so disappointed that Barwood are going it on their own. They don't have Plymouth City Council's permission, and they are not working with Mr. Hitchings. So to me, whether you've pulled out or you're not part of it, it's irrelevant. I also, the one answer I do want off Barwood this afternoon is PLY 44 requires requires consultation on the design code and the phasing before a planning application is submitted, and that is clearly in the wording of PLY 44. So I would like, if nothing else this afternoon, for my residents of Woolwell, reassurance from you that you will hold another consultation before you put your planning application in. To me, that is paramount to the residents that I represent. And if you say no, well, there is no option because it's in PLY 44. So I would like that assurance that that will be held, please, before the application goes in, which means you're going to have to organise it pretty quickly if you're wanting to put your application in the autumn, because the autumn began on the 1st of September. Oh, and also the last thing is, sorry, in with my presentation was a bit about Pigpie Drive and asking for an alternative route, and I am asking that you come back, you revisit that. So in amongst the answers, then I will hope that you will tell me that you have revisited it and come up with a better plan and alternative connectivity, because it is important to connect the two sites.
Councillor Hopwood, it's Rebecca Mitchell from Barwood. On the consultation, I will speak to you after this to see how we do that with residents, and we will do some form of consultation on the design code and principles of phasing, but noting that's not fixed at this point in time. In terms of Pigpie, I think Neil explained that we've already looked at alternatives. I think we'll need to take that point away and discuss it with highways and with the officers of this council. It is a policy requirement of PLY 44, and we can't hide away from that. Technically, we feel it works without it, but what is better? On balance, it's not a decision that we can make on our own, so again, we will take that away with your officers and Devon, obviously, because they're the highway authority, and we will respond in due course on that as well.
Gentlemen, if either of you wish to say anything, because you're having a fairly intense questioning, which is quite right.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My name is Guy Hitchens. I'm here with my father today representing his interests. It was just one question of clarification on your landscape strategy slide. I couldn't discern what some of the keys were. You had some of the land parcels labelled as A, I, S, T, I think it was. Okay, I was just going to ask that, and the current playing fields, I think, were marked in a pink-purple colour. Again, I couldn't make out a key on the slide. I was just wondering if that would be part and parcel of the presentation pack when it's put out to the email recipients. Thank you, Jim.
So we've always, even from the very earliest meetings that we had back in 2015-16, we were always given a very clear steer by councillors, by your representatives, indeed. The existing pitches were much valued by the local community. I appreciate they're in private ownership, your ownership. And I know people talk to us about rugby clubs and what we could do with that, and that's not within our gift at the moment, unless we're working directly with you. We've constantly shown the pitches retained because that's what residents and councillors have asked us to do. What then happens on the remainder of the land in terms of housing coverage and public open space? Well, you'll need to work that through. But any coloration, don't read anything into that. The bottom line is there to be retained, and we've always been told that's what we should show on any of our drawings, and that's what we've done.
Yes, okay.
Just to say that they're retained then, because obviously it's been provided by my father really at his goodwill for, over 40 years that I'm aware of. Your land usage that you had earmarked in terms of sports fields, playing fields, the annotations that you got, does that meet the requirements for the development, or the areas that you're providing, is that in addition to the existing playing fields?
So on the land use plan, the sports provision that we've shown effectively is the right policy provision to cover, I don't want to open this up again, but to cover the 2,000 units and what the people living in those will require. If you have an application for your land, you would need to provide your requisite quantity of POS based on how many units and therefore the people that are living in them. Whether you utilise your existing pitches as they stand today or not, that's probably a question for you and the planning officers. But we've effectively done what we need to do to cover the requirement. Yeah.
Thank you.
The gentleman on the end in the blue t-shirt.
Thank you. It's Harry Andrews, a Woolwell resident. At the moment, Woolwell is covered by the Ivory Bridge Police Station, and it's very rare that we see a police officer in Woolwell. So you're proposing to build another 2,000 homes, almost triple the size of Woolwell, and run the risk of drastically changing the community. You've mentioned some of the agencies you've talked to. What, if any, discussions have taken place with Down and Cornwall Police to make sure that we've got adequate police cover as the size of Woolwell rapidly expands?
Somebody like to take that one, please?
Thanks. We haven't had any direct conversations with Devon and Cornwall Police at present. They will be consulted on the application. In terms of the provision and who pays for officers, that's not something that can be paid through the planning system and the Section 106. But what will be considered through the process of the planning application is if there's any infrastructure that is needed to support the work they do. So sometimes you might see a police base, so sometimes it's a desk in the local centre. So that's the sort of thing that we'll be talking to. And there's obviously design considerations that Dominic can talk about if you're interested about secure by design and how you try to prevent the issues in the first place. But that's something that will be addressed through the application, and it is important.
Thank you. Gentleman in the blue shirt, would you like to take that mic in front of you?
Yes, good afternoon. Ian Kempsell. I'm a Roborough resident. Thank you, Nikki, for your comments from Woolwell's perspective. On all the sketches on the viewgraph, Roborough was, I would say, overlooked, but never been mentioned. Certainly, this development on the edge of the existing Woolwell is going to have serious impact on Roborough Village. And I've not heard of any comments made about the impact that's going to have on us. So really, the question is, have you considered our impact and the fact that people who, for example, now overlook Wilbur Green and beyond the lane, there's going to be possibly 3-storey houses built in the fields behind them. Are they be considered? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the short answer to your question is yes, but let me explain. When we carried out the public consultation at the exhibition events, we met a number of your neighbours, and I know that Nikki lives locally as well. After that event, we met and we walked on the triangular green and stood and imagined what it would be like with housing development there. And we went away and we adjusted the parameter plans which define height and density to basically give a bit more room and to lower the burden so you wouldn't get 3-storey buildings there. That can be a definitive instruction. I can say that quite clearly. So the answer to the question is yes, I think we have now, but we hadn't perhaps done enough of what we should have done at the time. And I think there were also a couple of very important pieces picked up, which is hard to kind of show at this. And that's access positions to people's individual houses, where we made sort of, well, you can take New Road, you can do that, you can do this, but actually there were some individual private drives that we hadn't picked up, and Councillor Hopwood was good enough to point that out to us in no uncertain terms. So I hope but there's always, I'm not trying to be clever, there are probably things we still need to perhaps look at along that. And the only way to do it is to walk and look and talk to people such as yourselves to make sure we do that. So half, mostly a yes, I think is the answer. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Hopwood, can you pass your mic straight back behind you, please?
Thank you. Cheryl Stansbury from Dartmoor National Park. It's good to see you've taken on board comments made by a colleague of mine. Particularly, it was difficult to read the density information on the screen, but reassuring that you're looking at lower densities in the sensitive areas, and no development on the left side of the new access road. There was no mention of lighting. I realise that's normally a reserved matters thing, but we would just ask that consideration be given to potential for light pollution, the impact on Dartmoor's dark skies. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So I'm not a lighting expert myself, so I'm light on the details, pardon the pun. But what I do know is that a lighting impact assessment has been undertaken, working very carefully with the EDP on the landscape and ecology, so looking at the long distance views to the national park, but also, of course, the impacts in terms of lighting on things like bats and dormice, etc. So yes, that work has been done and will be submitted as part of the planning application.
Right. Yes, if you'd like to come forward to that mic, please.
John Skinner, I'm a resident of Rover Village. I live opposite Rover Green, in fact nearer than my colleague and neighbour Mr Kemsel spoke just now. My question relates to the old tramway, which Dominic made much mention of in his presentation. Will that remain untouched through the development process? And by untouched, I mean exactly that. The developer doesn't go along with his JCB and digs it up. Will the granite sleepers remain in place the whole time? Or will they be dug up and possibly replaced if it's remembered to do it? Or what will happen? I note that the proposed housing on the outline plans that we've still got show some of those houses actually adjoin the tramway. The tramway is perhaps at the bottom of their back garden. It seems a little bit difficult, to my eye at least, that the developer is going to be building houses possibly either side of that tramway and yet not interfering or disturbing the process. That tramway's been there since, I think, the 18th century, 200 years probably. So a lot of the granite sleepers are still there. I've walked it. I've probably walked it more often than most people in this room. So I do know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've definitely not walked it as many times as you have. But even the first time I walked it, I realised what a massive natural asset it was. And it was the landscape architects who pointed out to me the Devon banks and looking at the cross-section and how it works. We could see the old bed, we could see the material that's there. We can see the sections of it that are intact in cross-sections and those that are not. I'd like to know a bit more about the granite sleepers, where they are, what they do. Maybe you can help us with that. Absolutely, I've absolutely no doubt about that. Our intention is to touch it as little as possible. And the only discussions that have taken place amongst, when I say the team, I mean with officers, has been about somebody meant secure by design. Do you need to light that route? Well, our view is that we don't think we should, but we've got to also make sure that we cover off our bases in terms of safety. The first bit of your question, in some ways, is kind of is really critical one, because if you have an asset and you damage it, you don't ever get it back, do you? I mean, I'd agree with you on that one. And there was some previous talk early on in the design evolution about using the tramway, or at least a part of it, or a space next to it, for one of our drainage attenuation channels. And the reason we discounted that was because of the very point that you've made, that there's too much disturbance to the ground. Even if you're on the outside of the Devon bank, and you've respected or you hope that you've respected the vegetation, that actually the disturbance there could change the kind of water balance of what is quite a delicate ecosystem in the bank. So I think we were quite conscious that we didn't want to do that. There has been some discussion, and I'm again being quite open with you, about is the tramway suitable for a construction access to the site? The answer to that is no, and that's simply because of width. I mean, it is just not wide enough to do that job. If you put a full-size truck down there, you will destroy the very thing that you're hoping to utilise and protect. So I think we've, other than perhaps the very northern top section where it's kind of lost a bit of its shape and form, I mean, our intention there would be effectively a restoration project to try and bring it back to what it was, which has its own sensitivities and its own requirements. I get that. Something that looks like the real thing, but is a poor imitation, is almost worse than doing nothing at all. But I think we do understand the asset. One of the things that I've always found interesting about the tramway is that I talked about it as being flat. Well, from top to bottom in the site, there's 30 metres difference. I mean, that's the equivalent of a 7 or 8 storey building. It has a constant grade. I think we know most of the characteristics. I might need your help on granite, but it's very much our intention to retain it and to look after it and not damage it in any way, either through the planning or the construction process.
Right. It's 4:30. I think we've given this a fair airing. And as you know, we've got the questions that Councillor Hopwood has asked to be written in black and white. That's the best way to get them. You've asked a lot of other questions. Unless there's anything really burning that you want to ask. Yes, sir? Yeah.
Thank you. Father Simon Rondell, Bickley Parish Council, Vicar of the whole Gaff. So I've got a vested interest in it. Recognising one area that just hasn't been brought up or dwelt on very much is the issue of the school and its relationship and integration with the existing Bickley Downs School. Two schools in close proximity is not something we would like in terms of a form of competition, but in fact more in terms of a collaboration. And issues of new schools arriving, as we've seen with the establishment of St Matthew's. I'm not aware that there's been much consultation, if any, with the local education authority or the Diocese of Exeter, who are both responsible for that collaboration. And so I'd be interested to see where strategically that leads, because simply just deciding, well, we need primary school because we're building enough buildings and we're going to have enough bodies. It's necessary for that to be much more integrated than that. And my other reflection on that is that building of houses does not necessarily build community. And I still feel that there's a little bit of a black hole in the middle here, within this growth area of the housing building without the other necessary parts of community provision, which ensure that communities are networked, communities are engaged. It's not just about the roads, and it's not just even about a one-stop. It's about something more deeper and more fundamental than that. And again, I think if we lose sight of that, then there's a grave disservice to both the existing residents of the areas of which, as you all know, I'm part of that, but also new residents into this new build area. And that, you know, would be a terrible tragedy if that was the case. Thank you very much for letting me say that.
Should I take the school question and Dom pass back to you on the integration point? So thank you for that. It is a good point. I think in terms of the principle of a new school on site, that is needed, and the principle of that is accepted. You're absolutely right that it's not about competition between the old school and the new school, and how do you make it work and become one place and you have that collaboration. So that's something we've got to continue discussing with the education department. School deliveries getting increasingly difficult or complicated, at least, because they're all independents now in the way that you deliver schools and get a provider and an operator and the timing that it opens, and how do you get that relationship between the two, and community use of the space within the school as well are all things that we need to continue those discussions, and they're long and complicated, and I'd welcome a discussion with you within that to see how the principles can then be put into our Section 106 agreement so it's delivered properly. So maybe we could have a discussion afterwards, swap cards and do that. Thank you, and I'll pass back over to Dom.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with you about the, it's not just about bricks and mortar and roads, it's about you know, how people's minds work, and it's about those that live and those that are coming, and how do you predict what those that come. Absolutely, totally with you on that. I know people want to go home, but can I just share one very quick example with you about education? Houghton Regis, 5,000 houses, northern edge of Dunstable, similar scenario in terms of existing community, quite low social standing, and they wouldn't mind me saying that, they told me that. On the edge of the existing site was a small primary school, and at the exhibition, the headmistress of that school came up to me and said, Dominic, I can see that you've shown a new school similar to this inside the development. I'm really worried. So why are you worried? Because we've got a really high-performing school. In the school tables, it performs really well, but the buildings are falling to bits. And I'm just really worried that your new school will exactly as you've described. So what happened? 3 months later, having taken this back to our clients and to the local authority, what we've done is, and further discussions with the headmistress, we've moved the school from the internal edge of the site so that it butts up against the existing school, because the existing school is right on the edge of the developed area, so that what can happen is that a new school can be built on the new site. When it's ready, the existing school will decant and use that school. It'll be designed big enough to do that, and the existing site will become some of the playing pitches, etc., etc. And so effectively, from having two competing pieces, you have one school run by the same people. Now, that all came about through one discussion at a consultation event. It does work sometimes, and maybe we have to be a bit more, a bit clearer, a bit more communicative, and we have to find a similar solution here. I know they're not next to each other, I can't do that, but I do understand the question, I do agree with the principles behind it, and I think maybe we can be a bit more creative, shall we say, with the answer to your request. Yeah.
Right. Members, ladies and gentlemen, officers, representatives of Barwood, thank you very much for the last 2.5 hours. It's been very enlightening, and I'm sure Barwood has learnt an awful lot, and I hope they take it away, and I'm sure that they will come back with answers to questions and with discussions with officers. This will be thrashed out, and I hope that all of you have appreciated that we've tried our level best to give you all a chance to question the developers. And believe you me, when any application comes into this chamber, we as members will give it a real going over before we actually let it go through to make sure that it's right. It's always been the way, and it always should be the way. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your attention and declare the meeting closed.